Okay, guys, here's the back of your notes. So because you're going to be doing all your homework online, you're going to be using the online graphing tool. So I'm not going to graph these with you right now, the second two. I'll send you pictures of their graphs just to try and make this video shorter. All right, so let me just go through at least how you would recognize what all the changes are and what you would do to your Y's and what you would do to your X's and how you would get your X-axis set up. But then I'll just send you a picture of the actual graph and what the ordered pairs became. All right, just to try and make this video a little bit shorter. All right, here we go. This one says, find the amplitude, period, and phase shift of this function. Well, the first thing you should do is rewrite it because they like us to pull out that factor of 4 so we can see the phase shift separately. So we're going to rewrite this as y equals 2 times the cosine of, we're going to pull out the 4, and then it'll be what? Divide this by 4, I get x, plus divide this by 4, I get 3 pi over 4. All right, and then we still have the plus 1 on the outside. So it looks like it's going to be 2 times the y's. This says 4 times the x's, so it'll be the x's divided by 4. This says x plus 3 pi over 4, so that's really going to take the x's and minus 3 pi over 4. So your phase shift is 3 pi over 4 to the left. And then plus 1 is being done to the y's, so there's a vertical shift of an up 1 that you would add to the y's. All right, so here we go. So just to get you guys ready, let's do our x's first. It says 4 times x, right? So we would do the x's and divide them by 4, which is going to horizontally shrink the graph. Well, if your x's got divided by 4, so did your period. Therefore, the period got divided by 4. So the period of cosine used to be 2 pi. We're going to divide it by 4, which means that's going to be pi over 2. So your new period is pi over 2. So it's going to take pi over 2 units to create one cosine wave now. All right, now your counting increment. If you take your new period, pi over 2, and divide it by 4 into 4 subintervals, well, that's actually going to equal pi over 8. So pi over 8 is going to be your counting increment. So you can get your x-axis ready right now by counting by pi's over 8. All right? So 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8 is actually pi over 4. 3 pi over 8, 4 pi over 8 is pi over 2. 5 pi over 8, 6 pi over 8 is actually 3 pi over 4, 7 pi over 8, 8 pi over 8 is pi, 9 pi over 8, 10 pi over 8 is actually 5 pi over 4. All right, 11 pi over 8, and again, you could probably stop now. All right. And then let's go this way. So now you can just count these ones in the negative direction. Negative 1 pi over 8. Negative 2 pi over 8 is negative pi over 4. Negative 3 pi over 8. Negative 4 pi over 8 is negative pi over 2. Negative 5 pi over 8. And then negative 6 pi over 8 is negative 3 pi over 4. And then again, your x-axis should be ready to go for all of these new points, okay? All right, so what's happening? The x's are getting divided by 4, causing the period to change. And then your x's, it says plus 3 pi over 4. So we know that's going to be the x's minus 3 pi over 4. So it's going to cause this shift in the graph to go left 3 pi over 4 units. Okay? All right, so that's going to happen to your x's. Now what's happening to your y's? It's going to be 2 times the y's. So it's going to vertically stretch the graph out, and then it's going to be the y's plus 1. So that's also going to bump the graph up 1 whole unit. It's going to take the whole graph as a unit and move it up 1. All right, so now, just to get you started, what did the original cosine graph look like? Well, the original cosine graph went from 0 to 2 pi, and he started up at 1 and then went down and back up. So his original key points, it started at 0, 1. And then it went to pi over 2, 0. Then it went to pi negative 1. And then it went to 3 pi over 2, 0. And then it went to, excuse me, 2 pi 1. Okay? And now these are the 5 ordered pairs. Excuse me. These are the 5 ordered pairs that you should be making these changes to. You're going to take your x's, divide them all by 4, and then add 3 pi, I'm sorry, not add. You're going to subtract 3 pi over 4 from your x's. Then you're going to take all your y's, times them by 2, and add 1. Okay, so just to keep this video short, I'm going to send you a picture of what these ordered pairs became once you divided the x's by 4 and minus 3 pi over 4, and then what your y's became once you times them by 2 and added 1. I'll send you your new ordered pairs and your new graph. Just to keep the video short, I won't do it with you. Because again, on your homework, you're not going to have to do it by hand. You're just going to have to make these changes. All right? So, just to answer the questions, your amplitude. Well, you did 2 times the y's, right? So that's also 2 times the amp. So the amplitude is going to be the absolute value of 2 times the original amp was 1. So the new amplitude is 2. Your period, we already said, is pi over 2 units. And your phase shift is going to be left 3 pi over 4 units. Okay? This is your phase shift. Okay? And again, I'll send you a picture as to what all this looks like on the new graph. All right, let's go to the last one. Find the amplitude, period, and phase shift of y equals negative 3 times cosine of negative 4x plus pi. All right, so first things first, we got to rewrite it. Now, this one has a little bit of a trick. So y equals negative 3 times the cosine of, pull out the negative 4, that leading coefficient. All right, divide this by negative 4, I get x. Divide this by negative 4, and now I have minus pi over 4. Okay, and then there's no plus number on the outside. All right, well, remember, we don't like a negative argument, so we use our trig identities, and cosine negative theta being an even function, when you plug the opposite of theta in, the original y value came out with no opposite effect. So when you pull this negative out, it actually becomes the original y value, which we have to assume was the original positive. So now when you pull him out, it's going to be y equals negative 3 times the original positive. It just stays, right? It would go back to the original, so the negative just becomes positive on the outside. It would stay negative 3 times the cosine of 4 times x minus pi over 4. All right? So just know whenever it's cosine and you pull this negative sign out, it just leaves the original one exactly the same. If this was a sine curve, right? Sine negative theta, when you plug the opposite of theta in, the opposite of that ratio came out. So if this was sine, when you pulled that negative out, it would have gone negative out here, and then a negative times a negative would have turned this positive if it had been the sine function, okay? All right, so here we go. This is the one we have to play with right now. That's who we have to answer to. Okay, so we have this negative 3 on the outside. That's going to be done to the y. So it's going to be vertically stretching it and causing an x-axis reflection. It looks like we have 4 times the x's, but we're going to divide the x's by 4, causing a horizontal shrink in the graph. And then it looks like x minus pi over 4, but we're really going to add pi over 4, which is going to shift the whole graph to the right, pi over 4 units. All right, so here we go. Let's get started. So first things first, what's happening to the x's? This says 4 times x, right? So we're going to take the x's and divide them by 4. So therefore, the period is also going to get divided by 4. So take your original period, 2 pi, and divide it by 4. That's pi over 2, right? So that means it's going to take pi over 2 units to make one of these cosine waves. So this is your new period. Okay, now if you want to get your x-axis ready again, you're going to be counting by, well, take your period, pi over 2, divide it into 4 subintervals, and you get pi over 8. You're going to be counting by an increment of pi over 8 again. So we're going to look just like this one. So we're going to count by pi's over 8. So if you want to get your x-axis ready, you can. 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8, 3 pi over 8, 4 pi over 8 reduces, 5 pi over 8, 6 pi over 8 reduces, oh, that's a 4, sorry. 7 pi's over 8, 8 pi's over 8, 9 pi's over 8, 10 pi's over 8 reduces, 11 pi over 8, and so on. And then you can count it backwards in the negative direction. Negative 1 pi over 8, negative pi over 4, negative 3 pi over 8, negative pi over 2, negative 5 pi over 8, and then negative 6 pi over 8 reduces. And now your x-axis should be ready to go. So now all you're going to do is let's recognize those changes, right? So we took our x's and divided them by 4. Then we have to take the x's and we have to not minus, but add pi over 4. So it's going to be the x's plus pi over 4, right? Which is going to cause the whole graph to shift to the right pi over 4 units. So that's your phase shift. Your phase shift is right pi over 4 units. Okay, so that's what's happening to the x's. They're being divided by 4, and then you're going to add pi over 4 to them. All right, your y values. What's happening to your y's? Your y values are being times by negative 3, which therefore means your amplitude is being times by negative 3. So your amplitude is going to be the absolute value of negative 3 times the original amp of 1. It's going to be the absolute value of negative 3. 3 is your new amplitude. Okay? All right, now all you have to do is take your original ordered pairs that live on the first cosine wave and do all of these transformations to them. So guys, your cosine, right? Y equals cosine x. Okay? He looked like this. He went from 1 down and back up. So he had these 5 key points that lived on his graph. He had the point 0, 1. He had the point pi over 2, 0. He had the point pi negative 1. He had the point 3 pi over 2, 0. And he had the point 2 pi 1. So these are the 5 ordered pairs that you should be making these changes to. All right, and you should see that your graph has been horizontally shrunk, bumped to the right pi over 4 units, and then vertically stretched by a factor of 3 and reflected over the x-axis, okay? All right, again, I will send you a picture of what this graph looks like and what your new ordered pairs became, just to save yourself trouble, because you don't actually do this on the homework. You just have to recognize these changes. All right, good luck, and text me if you have any questions.